and say,
Yeah.
that like the new agey kind of thing is like, you are not your feelings. That's a tough one for people to incorporate, because when I have really strong feelings, it certainly feels like it's happening inside me. So this is allowing them to get next to their feelings and see their feelings as an experience, not them.
Yeah, I mean, but even when you know that it's definitely happening to you, you know that you are also sometimes not burdened by those feelings.
That's right.
So it's some sort of an external factor, or
Right.
even if it's an internal factor.
Right.
It's a thing other than the core of what you are.
Right. It
Right.
doesn't define you.
Right. It doesn't define you. I think that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out, like, why are they so overwhelming
Yeah.
to the point where they want to leap off of a cliff? Like,
Right.
what is causing that?
Yeah, and it seems to work quite well for intractable depression, as it's called. What's really odd about the fact that it works, at least to me, is that if you look at the other new emerging, very effective treatment for severe depression, it's the exact opposite. It's this incredible work that Matthew Johnson and colleagues are doing out at Johns Hopkins, giving people macrodoses of psilocybin.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to him, we had him on the podcast, and I asked him, I'm like, what are your thoughts on microdosing? And he was like, macrodose. And I thought, like, whoa, this is an academic saying this. This isn't like some guy who's, trying to push psychedelics for his own agenda. This is a guy who's studying these in purely through the lens of science. Like, what are you talking about? What's critical about the macro dose of psilocybin?
When you say macro, what kind of dose are you talking about?
I don't know how they dose these, but this would be like in the gram range.
How many grams? 1 gram?
I need to check. We should check with Matt before people run off and start
Okay.
taking it. But certainly not micro, right? They're hallucinating. They're feeling a lot. And I said, what's the key thing? You're seeing success after success after success, eating disorders, depression, And he said, it seems to be, quote unquote, letting go. And I'm like, well, that's not science, right? What is letting go? Are you talking about heart rate 50% above baseline? Are you talking about breathe? And he said, there does seem to be something crucial about the people in these trials experiencing what would normally give them a complete panic attack and being able to just let go and go into the experience without trying to control it, without trying to tamp it down or ramp it up, just be in it.
What kind of experience that would give them a panic attack?
For some people, it's, he said there was one woman who came in, I believe it was a woman who, there was a painting on the wall and she thought she could jump through it. And so that, they're holding her back, they're holding her back. And they do give them tools to control their anxiety. So my lab works on a lot of breathing tools for real-time rapid control of anxiety. And we handed some of those off to Matt. So they give these to people as tools. They also have defibrillators in there. They have everything because it's a university setting just in case. And he said that the key thing is that they kind of feel overwhelmed, but then they feel supported enough by the therapist to lean into whatever's happening and they stop trying to regulate it. And that's where apparently he thinks the breakthrough is. And so that reveals something very fundamental. It says that there's something powerful in terms of long-term depression relief that can be learned in those states that has to do with not regulating oneself or one's need to run for safety. And I find that fascinating because, it raises all these questions. For instance, do you need to hallucinate? Maybe not. Maybe it has nothing to do with hallucinations. Maybe it just has to do with getting the person into a state of like real fear and then allowing them to lean into it. I don't know. That's a speculation. But I think that what's interesting about all this work on psychedelics is it's clearly working in these clinical trials. I mean, overwhelmingly, the data are more positive than negative, and yet no one knows exactly why it's working.
Right.
No one knows what's being rewired in the brain. There's all this speculation like, oh, dendrites grow and there's plasticity. Sure, but like in what direction? I mean, trauma is plasticity too. So something powerful is happening under the control of these psychedelic drugs in these clinical settings that are teaching people something valuable they can export. And everyone has a different narrative, like, oh, I saw this face or the green gremlins or whatever, melting reality. But it seems to be the ability to let go of the attempt to control one's internal state.
One of the weird things they found out when they started studying people while they were under the influence of psilocybin was the lack of brain activity. Do you aware of that?
Well, I know there's more. So the receptors for psilocybin are many, but one of the main ones is the serotonin 2C and 2A receptor. And those are in this layer of the cortex, the outer lining of the brain, called layer 5, which is extensively involved in lateral connections. And so it's absolutely true that you see more broad activation of the brain by any one stimulus. Show someone a picture, it's very broad compared to when they're not on these drugs. And when you broaden the amount of activity, I can imagine you reduce the total amount of activity in any one area. But my understanding is that these brain states are just so atypical. They're not like anything you see in sleep or dreaming, although they're similar.
Right.
There was a guy at Harvard for years, Alan Hobson, a genius, a neuroscientist, and he was saying, dreams are reparative. They help people through trauma. It's part of the trauma release process, blah, blah, blah. And psychedelics basically mimic that. And he may very well be right. He may very well be right.
But they also mimic normal human neurochemistry, right? Like the most potent ones, like DMT and even psilocybin, is some sort of relationship to DMT, isn't it? Like when it's when the body processes it, isn't it something like 4,4-loxy N-dimethyltryptamine? Like there's some things that are happening while your body is processing it that mimic what it is actual possible for your brain to produce.
That's right. I mean, you have two component parts. One is made by the pineal and the other is naturally made by neurons, and those have to be brought together. I've never done an ayahuasca journey. Admittedly, I just haven't done it.
Have you done mushrooms?
In my youth,
Back in the old days?
Back in the old days, and not responsibly, frankly. I kind of
times.
regret it because I mean, I was like a wild punk rock skateboarder kid. I was not this, I wasn't a university professor. And honestly, I regret doing it at a time when my brain was so plastic. I wish if I'd done it, I would have done it in like clinical trial and gotten data and that kind of thing. But I'm a nerd, so.
But you could always do it again.
Sure. Yeah. I think that.
Have you thought about it?
Well, I was part of a clinical